So what happens when you do something terrible, but you honestly, truly believed you were fighting a ghost? It sounds like a hypothetical, but it's not. Today, we're going to dive into a real-life legal case that forced the courts to figure out where the line is between a tragic mistake and a crime you can be punished for.
I mean, really think about that question. Is it murder if you thought you were fighting a ghost? This wasn't some philosophy class debate. This was the exact, bizarre question at the very heart of a real court case back in 1959. And, the answer they came up with really pushed the boundaries of what we consider criminal intent.
To even begin to understand how a court of law ended up seriously debating the supernatural, we have to go back in time. Back to India in 1958, where something truly strange happened on an old, abandoned, and supposedly haunted airfield. Okay, so here are the facts of the case, the things that nobody disputed. We're in a village called Roscovinpur, where everyone whispers about the haunted, abandoned aerodrome. One night, a man named Bahadur Thapa actually goes there with a group to look for these ghosts. And sure enough, around midnight, it's dark, it's windy, they see flickering lights and figures moving in the shadows. Thapa, convinced he's under attack from these spirits, pulls out his kurki, a type of blade, and starts swinging. But they weren't ghosts. They were local Adivasi women who were out collecting flowers. The result was just horrific. One woman was killed, and 2 others were badly hurt. You can imagine the legal mess this created. I mean, there's no question that Thapa killed someone. But did he intend to kill a person? That single question put the entire legal system in a very, very tight spot. So the case really boiled down to 2 completely opposite arguments. On one hand, you had the state, the prosecution, saying, look, this is criminal negligence. Believing in ghosts is no excuse for swinging a deadly weapon around in the dark. You have to use due care and attention. But Thapa's defense was totally different. They argued he made an honest mistake of fact. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone. He genuinely thought he was defending himself and his friends from a supernatural evil. It was a mistake about reality, not a malicious act. And his entire defense rested on this specific piece of law, Section 79 of the Indian Penal Code. It basically says, look, something isn't a crime if you did it because of a mistake of fact, and you made that mistake in good faith. And that's it. The whole case, his whole future, came down to what those 2 little words, good faith, really mean. So this is the crucial part. What does good faith actually mean in a courtroom? Because as it turns out, it's not just about being sincere or honest. It's a lot more complicated than that. And here's the legal definition that changes everything. Good faith requires due care and attention. This is the linchpin of the whole case. It means you can't just say, oops, I was honestly mistaken. You had to have been reasonably mistaken. You had to have taken the proper amount of care that the situation called for. And this is the $1 million question, isn't it? It puts you right in the judge's seat. Is the standard for due care the same for a guy sitting in a brightly lit office as it is for someone who's caught up in a panic, in the pitch black, totally convinced they're about to be attacked by a ghost? Well, the court thought about it, and their final answer was pretty stunning. Bahadur Thapa was acquitted. They found him not guilty. This quote from the actual verdict tells you exactly why. The court decided that, given the very specific circumstances, the darkness, the group hysteria, the local superstitions, the genuine fear, his mistake was made in good faith. They basically said that in that terrifying and confusing situation, he really did believe he was fighting ghosts, and so he had exercised the due care you could expect from a person in that state of mind. So this ghost story is fascinating, but what does it teach us about the law in general? Well, it's actually a perfect, if strange, example of a really important legal idea: the difference between a mistake of fact and a mistake of law. This table breaks it down really simply. A mistake of fact is all about what you perceive in the world. You think that shadow is a ghost, but nope, it's a person. That can sometimes be a defense. But a mistake of law, that's about not knowing the rules. Like you didn't know you were supposed to declare that gold you were carrying. And that is almost never a valid excuse. And it all comes down to this ancient pillar of the law, a famous Latin saying. Basically, it means ignorance of the facts can be an excuse, but ignorance of the law is not. You can't just use "I didn't know that was illegal" as a get-out-of-jail-free card. The law expects you to know the rules. And believe it or not, the ghost case isn't a total one-off.
This same principle has shown up in other incredibly bizarre situations. There was a case where a man with a high fever killed his son because he thought he was a tiger. Another where a woman remarried after 7 years, genuinely believing her first husband, who'd been lost at sea, was dead. In all these cases, the courts had to wrestle with the weird and sometimes tragic ways our minds can misinterpret reality.
So, why are we still talking about a ghost hunting case from 1959? Why does it still matter? Well, because the central question it asks is actually more relevant today than ever before. At its core, this case is about the incredible balancing act the law is always trying to perform. On one side, it has to consider what a person honestly, subjectively believed, but on the other, it has to protect all of us from reckless and dangerous actions. That good faith test, with its need for due care, is like the legal tightrope the law walks between those two very important needs. And this brings us to a final, really challenging thought. Back in 1959, the mistake was about ghosts in the dark. But today, what happens if you act based on a hyper-realistic deepfake video you saw online, or a sophisticated piece of digital misinformation that was designed to fool you? What's the due care and attention we're all expected to take before we believe what our screens tell us? The case of the haunted airfield reminds us that as our reality keeps changing, the law is going to have to keep redefining what it really means to make an honest, reasonable mistake.